The lake was my escape, a place where I found peace, where I could breathe. But one morning, the water turned green, fish floated to the surface, lifeless. And standing on the dock was the HOA president, smiling like she had won a war. She thought she killed the lake to stop me. What she didn't know was that she poisoned something much bigger, something she depended on every single day. And when the truth came out, the whole neighborhood would never look at her the same way again. Welcome back to HOA Stories, the place where suburban secrets, power struggles, and ironic justice come alive. My name is David. I live in a small neighborhood in the suburbs of Georgia. By day, I fix air conditioners. By night, I fish at the community lake. At least, I used to, until the HOA decided to make an example out of me. And this is the story of how they killed the lake and destroyed themselves in the process. The night before everything changed, I sat on the dock with my fishing pole. The air was warm, and the water was calm. I had no idea it would be my last night of peace. The lake was my second home. The smell of fresh water, the way the crickets sang after sunset, the tug of a line when a fish bit. It was the one place the HOA couldn't touch, or so I thought. The next morning, I walked back with my gear. The air smelled different, sharp, bitter. At first I thought maybe someone spilled oil, or maybe the trash bins were left open again. But as I got closer to the dock, I saw it. The lake was glowing green, thick slime floating across the surface, like paint spilled everywhere. Fish floated belly up, dozens of them, their white stomachs catching the sun. It looked like the whole lake had died overnight. And then, I heard the click of heels. I turned, and there she was, Mrs. Collins, the HOA president, in her bright purple suit. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did. "Guess you won't be fishing anymore," she said, her voice sweet but sharp. I didn't answer. I just stared at the fish. She tilted her head, watching me like she enjoyed the scene. "You brought this on yourself," she added. Her words cut deeper than I expected. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but part of me already knew. See, a week earlier, she told me I couldn't fish in the lake. She said it was against HOA rules. But when I checked the rule book, there was nothing about fishing, not one word. I told her that. I told her she was wrong, and that made her furious. She hated being challenged, especially in front of others. And when I kept fishing, she decided to teach me a lesson. Now I stood on the dock, watching the lesson play out. Dead fish, poisoned water, a lake destroyed. The thing about Mrs. Collins, she loved power. She loved standing taller than everyone else, even if it meant ruining everything around her. But what she didn't realize was that the same water she poisoned was the same water her family drank, the same water that flowed through every faucet in our neighborhood. I didn't tell her that. Not yet. I just watched her heels click away down the dock. Her perfume mixed with the stink of dead fish. A perfect picture of our HOA. Fake sweetness covering up rot. I sat down in my old folding chair, the one I always used for fishing. The pole lay across my lap. Useless now. The water rippled, bubbles rising where no fish swam anymore. And for the first time, I didn't feel peace sitting there. I felt something else, something heavy. Anger. The HOA had taken away my lake, my escape. But maybe, just maybe, they had taken away something of their own too. And I decided right then, I wasn't going to let this end quietly. Later that day, neighbors started to notice. Mrs. Turner from down the street said her garden hose sprayed out water that smelled funny. The kids at the bus stop covered their noses, saying the lake smelled like rotten eggs. But Mrs. Collins, she walked around smiling, as if nothing was wrong, as if she hadn't destroyed the one thing that kept this neighborhood alive. I thought about knocking on doors, telling everyone the truth, but I didn't, not yet. Instead, I watched, waited. Because sometimes, letting people walk into their own trap is better than warning them. The sound of sprinklers filled the air that evening, but the grass started turning yellow. The flowers drooped in front yards, and when I sat on the dock again, I noticed something even worse. The ducks. The ones that always came near sunset. They were gone. No ripples, no quacks, just silence, and the smell of death. The lake wasn't just mine. It was part of all of us, and now it was ruined. I leaned back in my chair, the sun sinking low behind the trees. I thought about Mrs. Collins' face, that smug grin. I thought about how far she would go just to control someone. But I also thought about the glass of water she poured at every HOA meeting. The same water from the same lake. I almost laughed, but I didn't. I just sat there, waiting. Because the funny thing about poison, it never stays in one place. And soon, she would taste it herself. But before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. The next week felt like a storm brewing. The lake still glowed green, a sick color that spread leaves. Then Mrs. Turner, the one who loved her roses. She cried on the street one afternoon. Her garden, the pride of the block, every rose drooping, leaves falling like ash. I stood on my lawn and watched. Mrs. Collins walked past her without even looking, like nothing was wrong. But the whispers grew louder, at the mailbox, at the bus stop, at the little park. Neighbors started asking each other, "Why is this happening? Who's to blame?" And slowly, the blame pointed back to her. But Mrs. Collins, she smiled wider. At the HOA meeting that week, she poured herself a tall glass of water, right in front of everyone. She drank it down slow, as if daring anyone to question her. But I saw her hand tremble when she set the glass down, just a little. She was scared, even if she wouldn't show it. That night, I sat again on the dock. The dead fish floated close to the shore. Some had started to rot. The smell was worse than ever, but I stayed there, staring at the dark water. I thought about what to do. Should I tell them? Should I warn them? Or should I let the poison speak for me? Because deep down, I wanted her to taste what she had done. I wanted her to feel the sickness in her stomach, the same way I felt the sickness in my chest, seeing my lake destroyed. And then it happened. The next morning, an ambulance came down the street, red lights flashing, sirens echoing through the perfect houses. Neighbors stood outside, whispering, pointing. It stopped in front of Mrs. Collins' house. Word spread faster than the sirens. Her husband collapsed at the breakfast table. They said he turned pale, started shaking. Too much poison, not enough clean water. That was the moment the whispers turned into something else. Fear, and fear turned into anger. Neighbors' sighs. "Do you think it's safe to drink the water?" Was this the HOA? And each time, I only said one thing: ask Mrs. Collins. Because deep down, I knew the poison was bigger than me now. It was inside their homes, in their glasses, in their children's cups. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It was everyone's. The next HOA meeting was packed, every seat filled, neighbors standing at the back. The air was hot, tense. People clutched bottled water in their hands instead of drinking from the tap. And when Mrs. Collins walked in, the room went silent. She sat at the front, straight-backed, papers neatly stacked. She opened her mouth to speak, but the room erupted before she could. Questions flew at her like stones. Why is the water poisoned? Why are our pets sick? What did you do to the lake? She tried to smile. She tried to calm them, but her voice cracked, and everyone heard it. For the first time, she wasn't in control. I sat in the back row, arms folded, watching. I didn't speak. Not yet. I wanted to see her squirm. I wanted to see the queen lose her crown. She raised her hands, begging for quiet. She said the chemicals were routine maintenance. She said the water was safe. But her husband's pale face told a different story, and the neighbors weren't blind anymore. That's when I stood up. The room turned to me, and I said just one sentence. If the lake is safe, then drink from it now. The silence that followed was heavy. Every eye locked on her. She froze. Her hands shook. Her lips tightened. and she didn't move. That was it. The moment the whole neighborhood saw her for what she was. Not a leader, not a protector, but a liar. The meeting ended in chaos. People shouting, demanding her resignation. She stormed out. Her heels clicked. King faster than ever before. And I knew the power she clung to was slipping away like water through broken pipes. That night, I walked back to the lake. The moon shone over the dead fish. The dock creaked under my boots, and for the first time, I didn't feel alone there. Because now, the whole neighborhood carried the same anger I had carried alone. But anger is a dangerous thing. It spreads. It twists. And soon, people weren't just blaming her. They were blaming the HOA itself. Signs started popping up on lawns. Dissolve the HOA. Clean water now. Justice for the lake. The same neighbors who once stayed quiet now shouted louder than she ever had, and every shout chipped away at her power. One evening, I saw her standing on her porch, her purple suit replaced with a wrinkled sweater, her hair messy, her face tired. She looked across the street at me, her eyes full of hate, but also fear. I didn't look away. I wanted her to feel it, the way I had felt it when I saw my lake dying. A week later, another ambulance came, this time for a child, a boy who drank the tap water after soccer practice. He survived, but the story spread like wildfire, and with it, the final nail in the coffin of her rule. The board called an emergency vote. Neighbors demanded she step down. Her own allies abandoned her. She tried to fight. She tried to cling to her papers, her rules, her titles. But power doesn't live on paper. It lives in people, and the people were done with her. When she walked out of that meeting, stripped of her title, stripped of her smile, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I looked at the lake. Still green. Still dead. And the sorry feeling vanished, because this wasn't just about me fishing anymore. This was about every sigh, BP of water, every dying plant, every scared neighbor. This was about what happens when control turns into cruelty, when power poisons more than just water. I leaned against the railing of the dock, the night air heavy with the stink of rot, and I thought, sometimes justice doesn't come from rules or courts. Sometimes justice comes from letting people destroy themselves with their own poison. When Mrs. Collins stepped down, the neighborhood changed overnight, but not in the way anyone expected. The board dissolved her position. Neighbors cheered. For the first time in years, people felt free. But freedom isn't always neat. The lake still sat there, green, dead, silent. And every time I walked past it, the smell reminded everyone of what had happened. The cheers from her fall turned into whispers again. Not about her this time, but about what to do next, without her control. The HOA fell apart. No one wanted to lead. No one wanted the blame. Meetings turned into shouting matches. Neighbors who once hid behind their blinds now screamed at each other across the park. And I stood there, watching it unfold. The lawns grew wild. Mailboxes stayed broken. Trash bins left out for days. At first it felt like rebellion, like sweet payback. But slowly, it felt like chaos. Mrs. Turner's roses never grew back. Mr. Raymond's dog stopped eating altogether. The child who got sick moved away with his family. One by one, the houses began to lose their shine. Paint chipped, grass browned, fences leaned. The perfect suburb started to look tired. And the lake, it rotted quietly in the middle of it all. Sometimes, I caught her watching, Mrs. Collins. From behind her curtains, she looked smaller, weaker. Her purple suit's gone, replaced with plain gray clothes, but her eyes still burned when they found me, as if she wanted to blame me, as if all of this was my fault. Maybe it was. I could have warned them sooner. I could have shouted the truth before it spread, but part of me didn't want to. Part of me thought they deserved to taste what I tasted. The bitterness of losing something you love. One evening, I sat on the dock again. The sun sinking red behind the trees. I closed my eyes, and I could almost hear the water the way it used to sound. gentle ripples, fish splashing, ducks calling. But when I opened them, all I saw was green slime and bubbles of gas rising from below. Death had a sound too. It was silence. The next morning, I woke to pounding on my door. It was Mr. Raymond, the old man. His face pale, sweat on his forehead. He held a glass of water in his hand. The water was brown, cloudy. He shoved it toward me, his voice trembling. "Tell me this isn't poison." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew what it was. The lake wasn't just dead on the surface. It was rotting from the inside. And now that rot was inside every pipe, every sink, every glass. That day, the neighborhood held a meeting, not in the clubhouse, but in the street. No rules, no minutes, no order, just neighbors shouting at each other. Who should pay for the cleanup? Who should fix the system? Who was to blame? And in the middle of it, I stood quiet, because blame was a dangerous game. Blame never fixes the water. It only makes the poison spread faster. Weeks passed, and things only got worse. People started selling their homes. For sale signs lined the streets. The families who stayed grew bitter, angry. The neighborhood, once united by fear of the HOA, was now divided by the aftermath of its fall. And through it all, the lake kept dying. The smell carried into every yard, the silence of no fish, no ducks, no life, became the soundtrack of our day. Sometimes I wondered if Mrs. Collins knew this would happen. Maybe she thought poisoning the lake would only hurt me. Maybe she never thought beyond her anger. But the irony was too sharp to ignore. She had destroyed the one thing that kept her power alive. The lake was the neighborhood's lifeline, and she cut it herself. One evening, I saw her outside again. She stood at the edge of her driveway, staring at the water, her shoulders slumped, her face pale in the fading light. And for a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. Because pity doesn't bring back fish. Pity doesn't clean water. Pity doesn't erase poison. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her words in my head. See what happens now. And I realized, she wasn't just talking to me. She was talking to all of us. The whole neighborhood. Her war with me had spilled into every pipe, every garden, every breath we took. The next morning, I filled a glass from the tap. I stared at it, cloudy, with a faint smell that made my stomach twist. I poured it out. And I thought, how long can people live like this? The neighborhood was unraveling. The HOA gone. The lake dead. The water poisoned. And all of us stuck here, living in the ruins of control gone too far. But then, an idea started to form. A dangerous idea. What if the lake couldn't be saved? What if the neighborhood couldn't be fixed? What if the only way forward was to burn down what was left and start over? I looked at the lake again that evening, the green surface reflecting the blood-red sky, and I thought, maybe the real question isn't who poisoned the water, but who's brave enough to drain it. The weeks kept dragging on, and with every passing day, the neighborhood looked less like a place to live and more like a place that was dying. Lawns turned brown, fences sagged, flowers wilted. The HOA was gone, but so was the order that kept everything looking perfect, and the irony way as clear. The people who once begged for rules now begged for freedom, but freedom without care is just neglect. The water problem spread deeper. Showers smelled like rotten eggs, sinks stained yellow, toilets filled with sludge. It wasn't just a lake anymore. It was in everything. The poison had become part of us. Some families packed up and left. For sale signs leaned crooked in the yards, paint peeling in the heat. Buyers came, but none stayed long once they smelled the truth. It was like a ghost town slowly forming, house by house. And through it all, Mrs. Collins still lived there. I saw her on her porch some nights. She didn't wear purple suits anymore. She didn't smile anymore. She just sat, staring at the lake, as if waiting for it to forgive her. But it never would. One afternoon, a letter showed up in my mailbox. Not from the HOA, not anymore. from the county. They wanted reports. They wanted answers. Neighbors had filed complaints, too many to ignore. And now, they were investigating. I knew what they would find. Chemicals, dumped without care. Poison running through the system. A decision made by one person that ruined an entire place. At the next street meeting, neighbors gathered again. No clubhouse, no board. Just anger in the open air. Voices rose. Fingers pointed. Some blamed the old HOA. Some blamed Mrs. Collins directly. And some started blaming each other. It's strange. When something breaks, people don't just look for answers. They look for someone to punish. And in that moment, I realized something. The same people who stayed silent when she fined us, the same people who kept their heads down while she ruled us, now wanted justice, but not justice for the lake, justice for their pain, their fear, their anger, and they were hungry for it. I kept quiet. I stood at the edge of the crowd, listening, watching, because I knew anger is like fire, and if you wait long enough, it burns the very hands that light it. That night, I walked the streets. I saw lawns overgrown, houses empty, kids gone. I heard sprinklers coughing out brown water. I smelled death rising from the lake, and I thought, maybe this neighborhood isn't dying because of poison. Maybe it's dying because of us. The next morning, I saw something taped to every mailbox, a notice from Mrs. Collins. She wasn't president anymore, but she still had the old HOA paper, the stamps, the format, and she used it to send out one last message. It read, "Follow the rules, or face the fines." The neighbors ripped them down, tore them to shreds, threw them in the gutter. Her words had no power anymore, but the sight of them lit the fire higher. That evening, a group of neighbors stood at her driveway. They shouted, they cursed, they wanted her gone. They wanted her house empty, her face gone from their memory. And for the first time, I saw her cry. Her shoulders shook, her voice broke, but no one cared. They walked away, leaving her in the shadows of her broken porch light. I should have felt something, pity maybe, but I didn't, because every tear she shed was still less than what the lake had lost. Still, the anger wasn't enough. The neighborhood needed more than rage. It needed something final. That's when I remembered the rule book, the thick binder she always carried, every page, filled with rules about grass length, mailbox paint, fence height, her Bible of control. And I thought, what if I used it against her? I pulled it from my shelf, the one I kept after she gave me my last fine. I flipped through the pages, one by one, and I smiled, because every rule she had written, every line she had forced on us, would now turn back on her. The next morning, I walked past her house, her lawn, overgrown by a few inches. Violation, her mailbox. Chipped paint at the corner. Violation, her trash can. Sitting out too long. Violation. I wrote every single one down, and I mailed them to the county, to the investigators, to anyone who would read. Not lies, not tricks, just her own rules, used against her. Weeks later, she got the notices. Not from an HOA this time, but from the city. Fines stacked up. Letters came daily. The woman who once fined us for breathing wrong was now drowning in her own paperwork. And I sat back, watching. Because sometimes revenge doesn't need fire. Sometimes revenge just needs patience. The neighborhood whispered again, not in fear this time, but in satisfaction. They saw her break. They saw her fall. And they knew. This was justice in its purest form. Still, the lake remained dead. Still, the water ran brown. Nothing I did, nothing anyone did, could change that. Justice had a cost, and the cost was the very heart of our neighborhood. As I stood on the dock one evening, the air heavy with rot, I thought about it. Maybe we won the battle against her, but maybe we lost something much bigger in the process. The rules had finally turned against her, and I thought that would be the end. But endings don't come that easy in neighborhoods like mine. Mrs. Collins stayed in her house, even as fines piled higher, even as neighbors avoided her, even as her name became poison whispered at mailboxes and bus stops. She stayed, like a shadow we couldn't shake. But here's the truth. Even without her power, something darker began to grow. The HOA was gone, but the hunger for control, it didn't die with it. It just moved into different hands. At first, it was small things. Mr. Turner telling neighbors their grass was too tall. Mrs. Diaz complaining about loud cars in the street. People nodding, agreeing, acting like mini presidents. It was almost funny. Everyone hated the HOA. But the moment it vanished, people started acting like it was still alive inside them. And soon, the fights began. Arguments at the park, shouting matches at the corner. One neighbor yelling about a broken fence, another about kids' toys left in the yard. It was the same war, just without the name HOA stamped on top of it. And through it all, the lake kept rotting. Green water, dead fish, smell of decay. The reminder that all of this started with one act of spite. But now, that spite had spread, like poison in the water. It had moved into people's hearts. One night, I heard shouting outside. I opened my window and saw two neighbors arguing by the curb. One accused the other of letting trash pile too high. The other screamed back about loud music. And then, a fist flew. The sound of it cracked the night open. The quiet streets that once hid behind perfect lawns now echoed with raw violence. Neighbors rushed out, phones in their hands, recording, yelling. The perfect suburb had become a battlefield. I stood on my porch, watching, and I realized we didn't need an HOA anymore, because the poison of power was already inside us. Mrs. Collins wasn't the problem anymore. She was just the spark. The real fire was burning in every single neighbor who wanted to control the next one. The county came back with reports. They said the water system was too damaged, that it would take millions to clean. Money no one here had. Money no one wanted to spend. And so, the pipes stayed poisoned. The water stayed brown. And the neighborhood stayed broken. Families kept moving out. One by one, houses stood empty. Windows dark. Weeds crawling up the driveways. The few who stayed grew more bitter, more angry, more cruel. It wasn't about community anymore. It was about survival. One morning, I walked to the dock. The boards were soft, wet with rot. I sat in my old chair, the one that used to hold me when fishing brought me peace, and I stared at the lake. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a ripple in the green water, like something alive still lived beneath. But it wasn't fish. It was darker, slower, like the water itself was breathing. I leaned forward, squinting, and then a bubble rose, popped, releasing a smell so foul it made me gag. The lake wasn't just dead, it was angry. I pulled back, my chest tight, and for the first time, I wondered if this place was cursed, not by magic, not by ghosts, but by us, by greed, by control, by pettiness. The poison wasn't in the water alone. It was in the people, in the streets, in the walls of every house left standing. That night, I heard knocking. I opened the door, and there she was, Mrs. Collins. Her face was pale, thinner than I remembered, her eyes wide, desperate. She didn't speak at first, just stood there trembling, and then finally whispered, "It's still spreading." I didn't know what she meant, so I asked her, "Spreading where?" She shook her head, tears in her eyes, and walked away into the dark. I stood there, frozen, her words echoing in my mind. Spreading where? The next morning, I turned on the faucet. The water wasn't just cloudy anymore. It was thick, like mud, with streaks of green. I dropped the glass in the sink. It shattered loud, and I realized maybe she wasn't lying. The poison wasn't stopping at the lake. It was still moving, deeper into the system, further into the town. Maybe even beyond. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but then I remembered. Who would believe me? Who would care? This was just a neighborhood, just a lake, just another forgotten suburb. No one outside cared what happened here, and maybe that's how it was meant to be. I sat back on the dock again that night, the rotten boards creaking beneath me. I stared at the black sky, the reflection broken by slime, and I asked myself, how long can people live in poison before they become poison themselves? The neighborhood was no longer a neighborhood. It was a ruin in disguise. Houses still stood, fences still marked property lines, mailboxes still lined the streets. But the life was gone. The laughter of kids, the smell of fresh-cut grass, the sound of sprinklers in the evening, all of it replaced by silence, by rot, by poison. The lake was the center of it all. Once blue, once alive, now green and dead, a mirror of everything we had become. I sat there one night, on my old folding chair at the dock, the boards soft beneath me, the air heavy with stink. I thought about the first time I fished here, how free it felt, how simple, just me, the water, and peace. But that peace was long gone. The poison spread further. The county stopped responding. Too expensive to fix. Families kept leaving. Houses boarded up. Those who stayed, they changed. They didn't wave anymore. They didn't talk at the mailbox. They stared, suspicious, angry, like every neighbor was an enemy. It wasn't community anymore. It was survival. And me? I stayed. Not because I wanted to, but because leaving felt like letting her win. Mrs. Collins, the woman who started it all. I saw her sometimes. She walked slower now. Her eyes sunk deep, her body weak. The woman who once ruled us with fines and threats now looked like a ghost of herself. One evening, I saw her at the edge of the lake. She stood still, staring at the water, her reflection rip, let in the green slime. And for a moment, I thought she might walk in, disappear under the surface. But she didn't. She just turned and looked at me. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't just a villain. She was a mirror, a reflection of all of us. Because maybe it wasn't just her fault. Maybe it was all of us. Every neighbor who stayed quiet when she fined someone unfairly. Every person who looked away instead of speaking up. Every one of us who chose comfort over courage. We let her become powerful. We let her control us. And when she poisoned the lake, it wasn't just her hand that poured the chemicals. It was all of ours. Through silence, through fear, through obedience. That thought stayed with me, even as the water in my sink turned darker, even as the smell seeped into my walls, even as the neighborhood crumbled around me. One night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the streets, empty houses staring back with dark windows. I reached the lake and sat at the dock. The moon glowed faint above, its light broken by the slimy water, and I whispered out loud, "Maybe this place deserves to die." The words felt heavy, but true, because how can a community survive when it poisons itself from the inside? The next morning, another for sale sign appeared down the street. Another family gone, another house abandoned to the weeds. I walked past, and I thought, soon there will be no one left, just me, just her, and the lake. A week later, I saw moving trucks at Mrs. Collins' house. She was leaving. The woman who once smiled while destroying us was finally walking away from the ruins she created. Her eyes met mine one last time. No words, just a look of defeat, or maybe relief. And then, she was gone. But the lake stayed, and so did I. I kept sitting there day after day, staring at the water, smelling the rot, wondering if it was me who was truly poisoned now. Because here's the thing, when you live with poison long enough, it doesn't just stay in the water, it seeps into your mind, your soul, it changes you. And I realized, I wasn't the same man who once came here to fish. That man is gone. Now I sit here, not for peace, not for joy, but for punishment. as if the lake wants me to remember every single day what we lost. Sometimes I see ripples again, not fish, not ducks, something else, something moving under the green surface, as if the poison itself has grown alive, watching me, waiting. Maybe that's the final twist, that the lake didn't just die, it transformed into something darker, something that belongs to the poison now, and maybe I belong to it too. I look at the empty streets, the broken houses, the silent yards, and I wonder, was this ever really about fishing? Or was it always about power, pride, control? The lake was just the battlefield. The real war was always inside us. So I sit here, waiting, for the day the water swallows me too. But tell me this, if you lived in a neighborhood where poison destroyed everything, would you stay and face it, or would you run before it swallowed you whole?